My name is Adrian Keller, and 3 months ago, my own father escorted me out of the company building I helped grow. Security badge deactivated.
Laptop config set.
Office cleared before lunch. The official reason? Strategic restructuring. The unofficial one? I was too cautious for the direction they wanted to take. The family company, Keller Infrastructure Group, was built by my grandfather.
Roads.
Bridges. Municipal contracts across Germany and parts of Eastern Europe. Solid, old money engineering. My older brother Marcus was the golden successor. Charismatic, aggressive, loved expansion, loved headlines. I loved balance sheets. That difference became a problem. The board meeting where it happened lasted 11 minutes. My father didn't look at me when he said it. Adrian, effective immediately, your position as CFO is terminated. Terminated. Like I was an external hire. Like my name wasn't on the original incorporation documents. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked one question. Is this unanimous?
Markus smiled.
Yes. What they all forgot, was something very small. Very technical. Very binding. They fired the CFO, but they couldn't fire a shareholder. And I wasn't a minor one. When my grandfather passed away 8 years ago, the company's shares were divided quietly. My father retained controlling interest. Marcus received a generous executive block. And I received something they underestimated. 40%. Not symbolic shares. Not ceremonial voting rights. 40% equity. At the time, my father called it motivation. Earn your dividends, he said. I do more than that. As CFO, I stabilized cash flow during a downturn, negotiated supplier contracts, reduced exposure to volatile materials pricing, built reserves while Marcus chased expansion. He loved risk. I calculated it. So when I walked out of that glass building with a cardboard box in my hands, I wasn't unemployed. I was simply repositioned. Because while they removed my title, they couldn't remove my ownership. 3 days after my termination, I received an internal memo forwarded anonymously. Keller Infrastructure was finalizing a major acquisition. High leverage, short-term debt, aggressive timeline. Exactly the kind of expansion I had warned against. And suddenly, I wasn't angry. I was curious. Because a 40% shareholder has rights. Inspection rights. Voting rights. Blocking power. They had fired the cautious one. But they had kept the brake pedal in the car. 2 weeks after my termination, I received the official notice. Extraordinary shareholders meeting. Agenda. Approval of acquisition financing structure. I almost admired the timing. They assumed I would stay quiet. That I would sulk, maybe sell my shares in frustration. Instead, I did what I had always done. I read the numbers. The acquisition target was a mid-sized Polish construction firm with impressive projected growth, but thin margins and ongoing litigation tied to delayed public contracts. The financing model relied heavily on short-term floating-rate loans. In stable conditions? Profitable. In tightening markets? Dangerous. Marcus had always believed speed was strength. I believed sustainability was power. The meeting was held in the same boardroom where I'd been dismissed. I walked in without a badge, without a title, but with 40%. Marcus avoided eye contact. My father maintained composure. The presentation began.
Slides.
Forecast curves. Strategic dominance. When it ended, the chairman asked, "Any objections before we proceed to vote?" Silence. Then I raised my hand. "Several," I said calmly. The room shifted. Because I wasn't speaking as a former CFO. I was speaking as an owner. And owners are harder to remove. "I object to the financing structure," I said evenly. Marcus exhaled through his nose. "You're no longer involved in operations, Adrian." "I'm very involved in exposure," I replied. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. I opened a folder and placed printed documents on the table. Debt sensitivity analysis. Interest rate fluctuation models. Litigation risk summaries from the acquisition target. You're leveraging 68% of projected revenue against short-term variable debt, I continued. A 2% rate increase erases your projected margin. Marcus leaned forward. We've stress-tested this.
No, he died calmly.
You've assumed stability. My father finally spoke. This isn't the time for personal resentment. I looked at him. This isn't personal. It's structural. That distinction mattered. Because this wasn't revenge.
It was math.
The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Keller, are you formally opposing the motion? Yes, I said. And as a 40% shareholder, I request a deferred vote pending independent risk review. That landed. They hadn't anticipated procedure. They anticipated emotion. And procedure slows momentum. Momentum was Marcus's weapon. Procedure was mine. The meeting adjourned without approval. For the first time since firing me, they looked uncertain. They had removed my chair. But I still controlled the room. The pressure started the next morning.
Calls.
Emails. Informal conversations. Marcus showed up at my apartment unannounced. You're sabotaging the company, he said without greeting. I'm protecting it, I replied. He paced my living room like it offended him. You don't even work there anymore. I don't need to, I said. Ownership doesn't require employment. That irritated him more than any insult could have. You always did this, he snapped. Hiding behind numbers instead of vision. Vision. That word again. Vision built skyscrapers. Numbers kept them standing. 2 days later, my father invited me to lunch. Not as CEO. As father. 40% gives you influence, he said carefully. But blocking this deal weakens us publicly.
No, incorrecta.
Taking on reckless debt weakens you. He studied me. You think we're reckless? I think you're optimistic under pressure. Silence. He finally asked the real question. What do you want? Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Leverage. I folded my hands. I want governance reform. Independent risk oversight. And veto protection written into the charter. He blinked. You're negotiating? No, I said calmly.
I'm formalizing.
They fired the cautious CFO. But they forgot something critical. You don't eliminate risk by eliminating the person who sees it. You just eliminate warning. 3 weeks later, the market shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. European lending rates ticked upward after an unexpected policy signal. Construction material costs rose again. Steel, concrete, transport fuel. The exact stress points I had modeled. The Polish firm they were trying to acquire delayed its financial disclosure. A supplier dispute surfaced publicly. Suddenly, the acquisition didn't look bold. It looked exposed. I didn't celebrate. I reviewed the updated numbers and sent a single email to the board. Revised risk assessment attached.
No commentary.
Just data. The emergency board meeting was called the next morning. This time, the tone was different.
No glossy slides. No aggressive projections.
Just tension. Marcus looked tired. My father looked older. The chairman spoke first. Given the updated financial environment, we need to reconsider. Marcus finally looked at me. You predicted this. No, I said calmly. I prepared for it. That distinction mattered. Prediction is ego. Preparation is discipline. The vote was reopened. The acquisition was postponed indefinitely. And just like that, the company avoided taking on hundreds of millions in unstable debt. They hadn't needed a visionary. They had needed restraint. And restraint still held 40%. 2 days after the postponed vote, the press release changed. Instead of announcing aggressive expansion, Keller Infrastructure released a statement about strategic recalibration and strengthened governance. Strengthened governance. That was my language, not Marcus's. The financial press noticed. Conservative pivot signals stability. One headline read. Investors reacted quietly but positively. The share price didn't spike. It held. And in infrastructure, holding is power. The following week, I received a formal letter from the board. Invitation to return. Not as CFO. As Vice Chairman of Risk and Strategy. It was carefully worded. Your continued insight is invaluable to the long-term stability of Keller Infrastructure. Invaluable. 3 weeks earlier, I was terminated. Now I was structural. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reviewed the revised charter draft they attached. Independent Oversight Committee. Debt exposure caps. Mandatory dual approval on acquisitions above a certain threshold. My terms. Implemented. Marcus called that evening. We can't move forward divided, he said. I considered that. Division wasn't the issue. Unchecked momentum was. You didn't fire me because I was wrong, I said quietly. You fired me because I slowed you down. Silence. He didn't deny it. I agreed to return. But not quietly. The next board meeting felt different. This time, I walked in not as the dismissed CFO, but as vice chairman, an elected role, protected by shareholder agreement. My nameplate was placed between my father and the chairman. Symbolism matters. Marcus presented revised projections, measured, conservative, structured. He wasn't as enthusiastic as before, but he was steadier. After the meeting, he stopped me in the hallway. You made your point, he said. Not angry, not warm, just honest. It wasn't a point, I replied. It was protection. He looked at me differently then. Not as competition, as counterweight. In family businesses, ego often masquerades as leadership. But leadership isn't volume. It's endurance. Over the next month, we renegotiated supplier contracts, reduced short-term exposure, increased cash reserves. The company's position strengthened.
Quietly. No headlines. No applause.
Just stability. One evening, my father called me into his office. He closed the door. You could have let us fail, he said. Yes, I answered. He nodded slowly. But you didn't. No, I said again. Because ownership changes perspective. When you hold 40%, revenge is expensive. Restraint is profitable. 3 months later, the numbers spoke louder than any apology. Revenues stabilized. Debt ratios improved. Investor confidence returned. The Polish acquisition? It collapsed entirely after a regulatory investigation surfaced. Had we moved forward, we would have inherited that liability. The board knew it. The market knew it. And, most importantly, my father knew it. At the annual shareholder meeting, he did something I didn't expect. In front of investors, executives, and senior staff, he said, "We avoided a costly misstep this year because of disciplined internal oversight." He didn't say my name immediately, but then he did. Adrian insisted on structural caution when enthusiasm almost outran prudence. That was his version of an apology.
Public.
Measured.
Permanent.
Afterward, Marcus approached me with a glass of water instead of criticism. You were right, he said simply.
No, irraplia.
The numbers were. He smiled faintly. For the first time in years, we weren't competing. We were balancing. They had fired me to accelerate. But acceleration without brakes is collapse. And now they understood something fundamental. 40% isn't just equity. It's leverage with memory. A year after they escorted me out of that building, Keller Infrastructure posted its strongest stability report in a decade. Not explosive growth. Not flashy acquisitions. Sustainable expansion.
Controlled debt.
Healthy reserves. At the anniversary board meeting, my father handed me a revised shareholder agreement. 40% remained mine. But this time, my veto power was formally codified.
Permanent.
Not because I demanded dominance, but because they finally understood balance. After the meeting, I walked through the production floor alone. Workers reviewing blueprints. Engineers discussing site logistics. Quiet progress. This company was never about ego. It was about legacy. They fired me because caution felt like weakness. They learned caution is infrastructure. You don't see it, but everything stands on it. I never needed revenge. Ownership was enough. Because when you hold 40%, you don't need to shout. You just need to stand still. And sometimes, standing still is what saves the entire structure.